I've always seen art as, or art school or art practice as sort of a tool for everything else.
Welcome to Artists and Offices, a podcast that explores, through interviews with working artists, the idea that the work you do for pay supports the work you do for love. Or does it? I'm your host, Rebecca Bird Grigsby, visual artist, crafty generalist, and dance enthusiast. Having quit my full-time day job in 2017, I'm currently a recovering artist in offices, rebooting my studio practice while trying to figure out my next career move. Each episode of this podcast explores the perspective of an individual artist juggling their creative practice with their day job. In episode 7, I speak with Berkeley-based visual designer Gabriel Martinez, who works by day as a design assistant for a quilt and craft book publisher.
So, hey, my name is Gabriel Martinez. I'm from the Bay Area. I'm 47 years old. I'm currently employed at a company. The name of the company is CNT Publishing. They specialize in quilt making books and fabric art books. I do graphic design production there.
If I were to meet you on the street and ask you, what do you do? How do you answer that question?
So if we were at a party and you asked me what I did, I would tell you I do graphic design.
If we were at a party. So how about, I'm always interested in this. I find that people like us who, do lots of different things answer this question differently depending on who is asking. So
exactly. Do
you, now that we, know each other, would you, if I were to kind of ask about what you do, do you find that you answer that question differently if, another artist asks you or another designer versus somebody who is maybe not in a creative field themselves?
Yeah, because in terms of art, I kind of see it as a spectrum. So if you're a dancer, if you're a visual artist, or if you're a performance artist, if you're a writer, then that's sort of the community I want to be in. And that community I would refer to us as creatives. Because even though we're doing different art, we sort of have this kind of understanding of what really elevates our soul. And that's to be creative.
Though we attended at different times, Gabriel and I both studied art practice at UC Berkeley. So tell me about your path to art. We were talking a little bit already about going to UC Berkeley. But I'm curious, as a kid, was being an artist or being a creative person something that you remember as a child? Was that something you wanted to do when you grew up?
I would definitely say yes. As a child, I always wanted to be an artist in some capacity. And I say that because I would always save my drawings and my coloring, not my coloring book, your pad of paper that you would have. I would go through my themes. I would went through a robot theme, a monster theme Godzilla theme, a robot Star Wars theme, etc., etc. And I'll sort of keep those. And to me, that would always be my portfolio.
So can you talk a little bit more about your formal training? What did you, were there classes that you took as a child or as a teenager? And then just kind of talk us through your educational background.
So in terms of being a kid and doing art, I always sort of did it on my own, drawing, simple watercolor paintings, that kind of stuff. When I really got serious, it was in high school. And what I mean serious is that my friend, Jason and I, we would do these drawing binges where the whole weekend we would maybe get a comic book, maybe an art magazine of an artist we like Franz Frazetta. We would copy his work and we would just do art all day. And that sort of kind of where my formal training started, because I would look at these artists' other works and I was like, oh, what's that technique? That's cross-hatching. I was like, oh, you can't do that with pencil. You can only do that with ink and pen. And then, of course, later on, I went high school. There's art classes. So I took some art classes in high school. So one thing I do regret, I was an athlete in high school. And all the art classes I want always conflicted with the sports classes I had to take. So in retrospect, I probably should have took more art classes in high school. Then I went to Cal. I kind of started off thinking that I would do art at Cal, and I didn't. I ended up doing history.
And why is that?
I think there's a lot of reasons. There's really two reasons. One, when I was here, was kind of the height of postmodern art, where it was visual elements were more conceptual, but they didn't really have a component for conceptual art. And because they didn't have that component for conceptual art, if you were doing postmodern art at that time and it was so heavily minimalistic, you really sort of needed that discourse. And the art department wasn't providing that discourse. Mm-hmm. So that didn't really, and I wouldn't say inspire me, but I sort of disconnect where like I don't have maybe the conceptual, the theoretical to really excel in that program. I would sort of just be going through the motion, not what I want to do. Because as a historian, it's mostly about narratives. And I was mostly influenced by narrative art, the extreme example being murals. And of course, that wasn't being offered at Cal at the time. So that's why I went to history, because I thought, at least in history, it'll give me a broader understanding. It'll give me more tools to engage in the world rather than just focusing on art.
Right. So were you able to, like, was that sort of maybe more interdisciplinary approach? Were you able to kind of do what you wanted to do in terms of like that example of mural art? Were you able to kind of dig into those narratives?
No, because in terms of doing the program, I just took the basics, 4 or 5 art classes, and then I decided, this program wasn't for me. It wasn't the instructors at the time. The discourse wasn't there at the time.
But were you able to get that? Do you feel like you were able to get that from the history classes? And
yes.
Like focus on the sort of historical context and the narrative, and then maybe look elsewhere for your kind of more technical skills?
Correct. I would definitely say history gave me a good background to engage the world. And then it gave me a lot of information how to engage the world. And that information really informs a lot of visual aesthetics.
As Gabriel mentioned, his strategy as an undergrad was to pursue a major that would allow him to explore the more conceptual side of the kinds of art making he was interested in. Later, Gabriel attended community college to supplement his degree with more technical training. And I know on your resume, you have a couple of other subsequent degrees and training. So was that something that you felt like were you sort of supplementing your bachelor's degree with kind of more technical training, or can you talk a little bit about what came next in your training as an artist and designer?
So in college, my undergraduate degree, like I said, I thought I was going to pursue art, and I did it. I did history, and then after that, I got a job, and I got a long-term job in the field and industry I didn't want to be in, or I thought I'd only be there for a small amount of time. But during that time, I was still doing art on my own. I was primarily doing silk screening. And then I was doing so much art. I think there's always the question that people ask, well, would you quit your full-time job to pursue what you really want to do? And their answer is, yeah, I did that about 10 years ago. I had a job at the University of California in the food service industry. I could probably retire with a pension, but it was driving me crazy. And I was taking so many art classes and doing so much art. I got to the point where I had to choose. I was like, okay, do I want to invest in myself as an artist for my next career, or do I just want to stay at this dead-end job for the rest of my life? And so then I resigned. I went back to school, primarily community college, Berkeley City College, and CCSF. And the reason why I took Berkeley City College was because Juana Alicia was there as an instructor. She's a mural artist. A lot of her murals are in San Francisco. And I think that was probably the best fit for me at the time.
So you talked a little bit about, you had this more, what could have been like an even longer term job. Are there any other sort of like day jobs that stand out as you're going through this timeline in college, after college, during or after your additional training that you can talk about? Any other random jobs that you've had?
Not really, because most of my jobs that are non-artistic have been in the food service industry, and those have been pretty consistent. And then after I quit that job and I went back to school to be an artist, then I got into a lot more different kind of jobs. So I could talk to that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. What kinds of work did you do?
Okay, so I went to Berkeley City College. I got a degree. It was in multimedia studies. And I was figuring, okay, I got this kind of artistic degree. I want to be an artist. Let's go get a job. I got a job working in a sign shop. It wasn't my first choice for a job, but I figured, hey, it's a step. I got to this job and I realized that all this stuff is technical. and I'm a creative. But it gave me a salary, right? A paycheck every week versus being an artist. Where sometimes where I see my creative friends, like, you know, you go on this like 6 months and you're in 3 shows and someone buys a piece of art and you have an article written up or something and you're an artist, and then the next 12 months you're like, oh, what do I do now? Kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
would you say your approach at that time was to kind of integrate, your need to have an income with your creative, drives, like in terms of
definitely,
like you were making a shift, it sounds like, from the food service positions to something more creative, even though you still aren't making your own work. Was that kind of your strategy at that juncture? Was to kind of integrate like doing something creative and making money?
Exactly. Because, the Bay Area, and during that time, there was, well, I guess I should go back. So when I wanted to get out of the food service industry, I was looking for another job that was very similar to what I was doing in the food service industry.
Was this before you went back to school?
Correct. But the recession had hit. And so then I actually had an interview for the city of county of San Francisco for human relations, because that was my next skill and sort of that bureaucratic UC Berkeley institutional. But then there's a hiring freeze, the recession happened. And then that's why I said, well, I could go back to school and I can invest in myself. And I always wanted to do art, so I'm going to do art.
Yeah, that's always, it seems like a good time to go back to school is when when there's a recession.
Exactly.
If you can't get a job. And in your case, it makes sense. I mean, you wanted to kind of shift careers and build on your creative talents and training as a teenager. Career. Yeah, exactly. As a creative. At some point when you were at UC Berkeley, when you were probably deciding on your major, it sounds like you decided that art practice was not for you. You majored in history instead. Was there anything like, what was your experience of sort of like professional practices? Was that touched on at all while you were at UC Berkeley? And was that at all part of your decision to kind of switch gears? Like, did you have a sense of what the practical kind of side of that would look like? Or did you, it sounds like in your case, you came to it just through like living life, right? Like,
not at Cal, because of course, going to an art school, they were going to have like, build your body of work, go to shows, hobnob, make connections, etc., etc. And then so like another path is like, well, you could always teach, you could always not research, but maybe when you could advise people on art or whatever the art world. So
consultant.
Yeah. You could be a consultant in some capacity in the art world.
What about in your experience at Berkeley City College and City College San Francisco? Did since you were more focused in a creative, sort of like an applied creative field, what was your experience of professional practices in those?
So
programs?
That's interesting, because as I consciously said, I'm going to be an artist. I was doing my art, I was making my art. But at the same time, I realized, you know what? There's a business side to this. I need my own website. I need my own photography. I need my own collateral. And then I started taking more graphic design classes. And a lot of my art is very similar to graphic design. So then that's when I jumped over next to the graphic design side of things. Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like it was always in the back of your mind, like those sort of practical, not only looking at it, the business side of being an artist, but also just the practical kind of side of I'm going to need a paycheck.
Exactly.
Like most of the artists I speak with for this podcast, Gabriel's studio space is in his home. His setup is unique in that it's divided between a first floor office for the more technical side of his creative practice and a basement studio that offers flexibility depending on what he's working on at the time. So let's talk about your current studio space or setup a little bit before we talk more about what you sort of currently do or kind of have done over the past 10 years. So describe your current studio space for us. And you might maybe talk about how this compares to, spaces that you've had in the past, pros and cons.
So unfortunately, my current studio space is a little bit underwhelming because I'm mostly doing graphic design. And that's right here in my office on a computer and whatnot. But the way I like my studio space, and I've always had it, I've been here since 1999.
In this house?
In this house. And I always said this area is my studio.
Where we're sitting right now? Or downstairs?
It's downstairs.
So we're sort of sitting in what you would say is your office.
Yes.
And you've got a couple of computers. So you do your design work up here.
Exactly.
More of a hands-on studio space downstairs?
Exactly. That's where my paint is. That's where my silk screen material is. That's where my pen and papers and pencils are. And basically what it is, it's one side sort of a wall that has all the books that inspire me, all the artists. One side of the wall has all the supplies. I have a fold-up table.
So that's something you can bring out, like if you're working on a larger project.
Exactly. I have a bunch of nails on the wall if I need to pin up stuff. I don't want my studio to be like, this is a table and this is a drawer. I want it to sort of be a box. So that way, whatever inspires me, I would able to have that set up to do whatever I want to do.
So it's flexible.
Exactly.
You can kind of shift the space depending on what you're working on.
I could do silk screen in it. I could do photography in it. I could do drawing.
If you could, would you merge these spaces? Like if you had more space downstairs or I don't know, like if you could knock out a wall and extend the space, would you have one space with both your, like your technical stuff, your computers and the more sort of traditional studio setup? Or do you like them separated?
I like them separated because as an artist who started off with pen and paper, I like filling paper. I like filling charcoal. I like being messy. I like turning on the radio. I like having the door open to get the sunlight, the breeze in. And then when I'm doing graphic design, it's
more cerebral.
Yeah, and I hate to say it, but it's a little bit more elegant because you can put all your work on a flash drive and it's clean. You sit down on a nice big sofa with a laptop and do it that way. And it is sort of different kind of shifting gears into that creative process.
So for you, having them separate, that works. Right.
I think that's perfectly fine for now.
How has this been? I'm curious how you've been here since 1999, so that's 20 years, right? If I'm doing the math right. How has that space downstairs evolved?
Well, like I said, unfortunately, it's a little underwhelming right now because I haven't really done that much artwork downstairs because I've mostly been doing graphic design. But it's gotten to the point where I probably have to start decluttering.
Yeah, I would imagine after 20 years you accumulate. I find that even the tidiest artists and printmakers are completely different in their studios. Like I'm very tidy in my personal sort of home space, but I sort of hoard potential art supplies. Like, I could use this in a project. So even I've been in my space for 8 years and I'm kind of going through like decluttering right now. So I can imagine. Right.
You got that project like, I'm going to need that size paper one day.
You never know. Yeah. Okay, so let's switch gears and talk about the work you do for pay a little bit. So tell me more about do you have a day, like what you have a day job right now.
Correct.
So can you tell us more about that?
Sure.
Like how long have you worked there and what do you do?
So let me give you a little bit longer story. So again, I went to Cal, studied history, worked in the food service industry, decided I wanted to be an artist, went to Berkeley City College. And then I got a job working in the sign shop and realized that if I wanted to support myself doing graphic design, I had to go back to school. So then I went back to school again at CCSF, City College of San Francisco, and that was a proper graphic design program. So that's where I learned all my technical skills. And along the way of doing my technical skills, I was fortunate to have a seasonal job doing graphic design, not during the holiday seasons. And then I was lucky to get a job after that for a longer term after I graduated City College doing graphic design. And then that job ended because it was contract. And then there's a period where I didn't work, but it wasn't very long, and it was mostly by choice. And now I'm working at C&T Publishing. They do books about quilt making and fabric art, and I just do the production.
Talk about sort of a typical, so is that like a Monday through Friday kind of position?
It's a 40-hour job, Monday through Friday, and my title is graphic design production assistant.
Do you go to an office, or are you able to do any of that remote?
It could be done remote, but I go in the office.
Are they here in the East Bay, or?
Yeah, it's in Concord.
I'm just curious. Yeah. Oh, okay, that's not bad. Because that's just my gripe about the Bay Area is like you find a job and you're like, it's going to take me 90 minutes each way. There goes my creative time.
This is fairly Bay Area specific, but as any creative person who lives and works in a metropolitan area knows, the time spent commuting is time you could be spending in your studio. Minimizing your commute and or working remotely is one way you can try to reclaim some of that time. So along those lines, I'm curious if you can describe kind of a typical workday routine. Like, when do you go to work? When do you make your own creative work? How do you carve out time for your studio practice? If work is busy, do you tend to make less of your own, creative work? That sort of thing.
A typical work day for me would be, getting on board, heading over to the office, and whatever in the queue of things that I have to do. And it's, again, I'm mostly working with layout, typography, image adjustments, and that's pretty much my day right there until I get home. And the second part to that is then how do I negotiate my creative?
Yeah, like how does your creative practice fit into that?
I would say what motivates me to do artwork is what really inspires me. Because one reason why I personally probably had to do a design job is that a lot of my artwork tends to be political. A lot of political work is not necessarily commercial. So in terms of doing work, like maybe I'll make a poster for a protest. Maybe I'll do a job for a friend who needs something. This being the new year, some of my resolutions are to finish those old art projects that I haven't done. Or sometimes because I take part, I have a little notebook, and if something really inspires me, then I'll sketch it out. I'll make a plan how I'm actually going to do it, be able to sit down and figure it out. So I guess the question is, what makes me do artwork is that it's really what inspires me at the moment. If there's something I really believe in, maybe I'll make some digital assets, post it online, make a flyer.
Do you, mentioning that a lot of your own work is political in nature, how have the last 2 years been for you? I wouldn't necessarily say that political art is more commercial now, but do you feel like there's more of an audience for work that has a political nature, especially work that kind of blurs the boundary with, graphic design and, having sort of a design-based aesthetic? Has this been a productive couple of years for you, even if it's just in terms of ideas or I don't know, like, how do you feel as an artist right now, as a designer?
So the answer to your question is, if because of the current presidency, is this a good time for political art? Yes, it is. It's a great time for political art. And there's so much of it out there. In fact, there's so much of it out there and so much good political art. I kind of feel like, there's so much political art out there. I don't have to do political art right now because it's already in everyone's mind. And there's so much good political art out there. What can I add to it? With that said, I haven't really kind of pursued national stuff in terms of political art. A lot of stuff I've been focusing on is something maybe that might get less attention. Like, for example, not recently, but in the past, I've volunteered with Unite here Local 2 and did a lot of graphic design for them. And that's more or less political art because I brought in a really conceptual bent to it. Minimum wage, the fight for 15, maybe I'll make some flyer.
So it's interesting. It's kind of like that. I see what you're saying about it. And I kind of feel this way about just art and design in general lately, that it's so saturated there, which is great. I mean, it's like the pie. I like to see it as like, not so much that I can't get a piece of that pie, but that the pie is getting bigger, right? Like, so many people are doing creative work. But it's interesting. I never really thought about, I kind of was seeing it as an outsider to political art, that like maybe there's a bigger audience for it now, but I see what you're saying about that is also more saturated right now.
Exactly.
But then at the same time, I feel like, I was just thinking this morning, I'm like, if you live in Oakland or even the Bay Area long enough, you will become an activist. Like, it just, you know what I mean? Like, there's so much right now that can use skills like the ones that you have to visually communicate that message out there. So it's kind of an interesting way. Like, you're not necessarily getting paid for that work. It's not commercial, but it's a way that you can maybe lend your skills and have your voice get out there.
Exactly.
Right?
And I've always seen art or art school or art practice as sort of a tool for everything else, because, I didn't necessarily go and get an art degree, but I definitely know the value of art. And as a graphic designer, I obviously know the importance to communicate something.
And I think working in design or having these sort of maybe more technical skills that, a lot of artists will go to art school and they don't necessarily learn those more technical or like computer-based skills specifically, I think gives you not only an added kind of toolkit, but it lends itself to creating work along those lines of kind of along the political discourse.
Well, that's the funny thing. In terms of deciding to go back to school and to be an artist, I mean, of course, I looked into all the private ones. I was like, well, do I want to be in debt $100,000 or do I want to go and make do with what I have? It's the Bay Area. We got this DIY ethos. So I sort of went the route of making do what I had. I mean, I went to 2 community colleges, and that ended up being 4 years, which would probably be an equivalent of going to art school. So a formal
but
art school.
For a lot less.
Exactly,
yeah.
for a lot less.
And I mean, not to knock the more expensive schools, but you clearly learned a lot of very useful skills.
Because when I went back to school, community college, there were a lot of people from art schools in there because they didn't have the skills. They couldn't take their own photography. They didn't want to pay someone hundreds of dollars for a website. They had a business savvy, what needed to do to promote themselves, but they didn't have the skills to promote themselves as an artist.
Yeah, that's interesting. I also, through my own kind of the personal impetus for this and my own kind of journey over the last couple of years and doing these interviews so far, I've realized that I'm really focused on people that are doing, like, there is kind of a concrete, like, here's the thing you do for pay. Most people have a job. And then, here's how you kind of fit in your own creative practice. But I'm realizing that a lot of people who make this distinction between like work they do for pay and work they do for love, there's always a distinction for people. Like even the people that we know who are from the outside look like they're sort of making it as artists and they don't have a day job. They're distinguishing between the work they do for pay. And they probably have like secret work that they're pushing forward that maybe isn't as commercial. So that's what's been really interesting to me. And I think some people, like that hustle and kind of like cobbling it together for adjunct teaching positions, and other people, different scenarios work for different people. It just depends on how you like structuring your time, I guess, what your practical skill set lends itself to, and then how you define yourself as an artist, I think.
A lot of times we made a decision, I'm doing this for a paycheck. I don't love it. I could tolerate it. And then I'm doing this because this is what I love and this is my art practice. So yeah, I had to figure that out. Because I was like, look, if I'm going to do graphic design for my income and livelihood, what kind of graphic design do I want to do? I've always tried to do graphic design where it's in the creative business. My current job at CNT Publishing, it's fabric arts, and there's a lot of creatives in there. It's a different medium, but all the elements are still there of art in terms of color, composition, texture, pattern. So in terms of making something tolerable, I just said, if I want to be a graphic designer, I want to be a graphic designer where there's other creatives. So
is this, kind of going full circle to what kind of, it sounds like inspired all of this, kind of career shift and doing what you're doing now? Is this more tolerable for you, sort of integrating, like doing, not only are you doing design work, but you are being sort of strategic about who you're doing that design work for?
Exactly.
Is this a more ideal situation for you now than food service was 10 plus years ago?
Oh yeah, because I could make a boatload of money doing food service with my experience that I have in it, in terms of management and just knowing like the industry and whatnot. But there wouldn't be a whole lot of peers that I would be able to associate with in terms of in terms of being another creative and being able to have a rapport and talk to them about certain things like that.
So do you ever feel tapped out at the end of the day, like doing design-based work, even though it's not your own? It's probably not always super creative, right? I'm sure there's a lot of it that's like somewhat tedious or kind of routine. Do you ever feel sort of creatively tapped out at the end of the day?
Actually, I would say I always feel creatively tapped out at the end of the day during the production work that I'm doing. It's not because I don't like it. It's because you're always in front of a screen. And there's only so much screen time you could take. And then you just got to come home and eat and lay down and look up at the wall and just sort of get all those pixels out of your head. And then later on, figure out what you're going to do next.
It's almost like it's because you're doing it on the computer. And then because right now you're doing a lot of your own creative work on the computer. I could see that.
I don't want to be on a computer
being
when
an
I go
issue,
home.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So are there any things that you do outside of work and you mentioned like binge watching a show but is there anything like that you feel is sort of critical over the course of a week to, just kind of keeping that balance, like meditation, journaling, reading, exercise? Is there anything like that you really feel like you have to fit into your day or, a few times a week to make it all work?
Yes. The one thing that sort of brings all the creativity together is at the end of the day, I still like looking at art. For a long time, that was sort of my own personal therapy because I was burnt out. So going to art galleries or other creative spaces is kind of like recharging the batteries.
Yeah, it's sort of like if you don't quite have the energy to make your own work, you can at least go and look at work that other people have made. And that's a good segue we can jump ahead to my questions about community and social media.
So in terms of going to these creative art spaces, I realized that I could use this sort of further my art career because I could take photos, which will keep my photography skills up to date. I could think about art and present it on social media, which will keep my design skills that are needed for social media up to date. And this is something that I actually like doing. I actually like going to art galleries and looking at art and appreciating art and sharing it with other people. So I started on Twitter, San Francisco Art and Visual Culture, where essentially a lot of it's reposting art galleries that I like. And when I get a chance, go and take some photography and just share it. And
so it really becomes kind of a resource for people like me who, like I follow, that's the kind of the people that I follow on Twitter and, Instagram and Facebook are people who are like, because you just can't, I feel like we need each other to like keep abreast of like what's going on,
Exactly.
So it becomes kind of a nice resource and an interesting way to be sort of keep active in the community. Do you use social media to kind of share your own work at all?
See, that's interesting because I've always been sort of ambivalent about that because being a political artist, that's sort of not the work that's going to get you a graphic design job because people are like, oh, this guy has a lot to say. We don't want someone coming in and talking about workers' rights, talking about the environment. We just want someone who's going to come in, do their job 9 to 5 and then leave. So in a lot of ways, that doesn't really make me an attractive candidate.
Interesting. So have you ever been in a situation where you had to sort of explain yourself or like reassure a potential employer that there is a distinction at the end of the day between your personal work and the work that you would do for that company?
I haven't because when I went back to school to be an artist, I was like, oh, this is my art, it's political. I didn't really think about it. But then as I started doing more design work and I had a more understanding of communication, discourse, and branding. And then I saw that disconnect. I was like, oh, what I'm really passionate about and what the body of work is doesn't really jive to any kind of commercial setting where it's not going to rock the boat in any sense. So for the longest time, I didn't really post that work. But then after working in graphic design, when I went out and started looking for a job, I just said, you know what? I'm just going to put all my chips in. I want to say, I do political art. Take it or leave it. If I get a job working in a nonprofit, if I get a job working at a business, that's fine. So in terms of that discussion about hiding that political aspect, I'm looking enough at the job I work with now. They were sort of like, oh yeah, we really like your stuff, your political stuff that you did. Because they looked at the technical stuff and we're on the same page where the political stuff, they understood it.
That's interesting though, because I think that's kind of a common thread as well, is feeling like you're living a double life, feeling like you have to maybe keep some of the outside stuff you're doing secret, even, if it's not political in nature, just that you have all of these. I think that sometimes we're worried that employers are going to think we're not committed to the job if we've got all of these other things going on, when the reality is even people that aren't necessarily creative have other things going on. So can you talk a little bit more? I'm curious about just touching a little bit more on the community aspect of what you do on social media and like reconnecting with your friend from high school. Are there any other things that you want to kind of talk about or ways that you stay active in the creative community, maybe outside of social media, like in terms of going to art shows and things like that? Is that just something you do for yourself, or do you sort of make a point to go to like the opening, or how do you navigate that, if at all?
Because a lot of my friends and I are sort of on the same page, a lot of things. A lot of times I could go to art shows with my friends, and that's sort of our outing for the day. I mean, maybe instead of going to a bar, have an art show. Maybe instead of a movie, we go to a gallery. In terms of expanding that community, I've always seen artists as these very extroverted people who are kind of hard to rein in. And then there's like graphic designers who are the opposite almost. So they're very introspective and almost kind of dirty. And I'm very extroverted. So in terms of finding community, it's I think I've been lucky because I went back to school. And I made a lot of good relationships with people and kept in touch with them. In terms of finding new art or new communities, I don't know. I guess it's maybe all online now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot of interesting conversations right now about like where you find your community, and these even like podcasts being kind of an extension of community, and online, sort of social presence being community. But it sounds like that's interesting though. It sounds like you've found sort of a network when you went back to school.
Gabriel has been able to maintain his creative network since finishing up his additional training. It can be much more difficult to maintain the level of production demanded by any sort of formal training without the arbitrary deadlines and expectations that training places on you after you've finished. To that end, I'm always curious to hear how artists with day jobs feel about making work in their studios that might never be shown in a more formal setting outside social media.
I think you've touched on this a little bit. How do you feel about making work that might never be not only sold, but never seen?
So that is a great question, because it's something I feel very strongly about, is that I think as a creative, that your art should be seen. Because this is my dogmatic opinion. If it's not seen, it's not art. It's something else. Maybe it's therapy. Maybe it's recreation. But, I mean, why be a poet and write great poetry and no one ever sees it? So, yeah, I think it needs to be shown, be it that you submit to an art gallery, if you do graffiti on walls, if you self-publish, just put it out there. That's what it's for. To me, I mean, art is communication, it's visual, and it's to be seen. Otherwise, I think you're doing art, but the context that you're doing is totally different.
Yeah, it's interesting. The visual communication is at the core of what you do, both for your job and for your own, your other projects, your political art or whatever you're working on personally.
Exactly. I kind of feel like, well, I'm an artist. Well, what kind of artist? I'm a visual artist. And then when you say that, it's like you're showing your work. So because I go to art galleries and I take a lot of photos and I post them, which is kind of ironic because I'm a big hater of the selfie stick. And the reason is because as someone who appreciates art, I walk through it and I figure out what I like. And then I go to that art piece and I meditate on it.
But for me, like, it's interesting, like, looking at the stuff that you post. I love following people and, accounts like that, because it just gives me that it's not a substitute for actually experiencing the work, but it's exposure that I might not have known about something that you post because it wasn't on my radar. And if the pictures are sort of intriguing enough, I'm not going to be like, oh, good enough. I'll make a point to like, okay, I'm going to figure out when I can go see this myself. Obviously that, we're both in the creative community, so we're going to make a bigger effort to do that.
Exactly.
But to me, it's important, like, to do that, to sort of share it with your community, not as a replacement, but as sort of a teaser almost, like, hey, you guys got to get out and see this. But on the other hand, I have been to some experiences that weren't necessarily even sort of marketed as like art experiences or whatever, or like art shows, where I went and there was so much hype and so much like visual documentation that I was underwhelmed. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
So I feel like it just really depends on what the work is. If it has a presence and you really need to, which I think most good sort of art does. I mean, most gallery shows that I got, like if I make the effort to go there, I'm like, I wouldn't get this from images, but I would get enough from the images to just want to go and experience myself. Mm-hmm. Whereas some things that are kind of starting to try to blur the line with like art and like marketing, or like almost like more straightforward consumerism, like a display that you would see at Target or something, they don't really hold up outside of social media,
That's a good...
Not to name names, but there are a couple that have come through San Francisco recently.
Well, that's a good point, because a lot of, in terms of going to art museums and art galleries, there is this sort of weird blurring of what is art. what is marketing, almost, because there are more and more design stuff that's selfie ready.
Right.
In terms of the presentation.
It's Instagrammable. Exactly. Yeah. It's like, which is fine. I mean, I think it's interesting for artists to kind of use that. But like, for example, I'm blanking on her name, but the artist that has a show at Berkeley Art Museum. Have you seen that yet?
The Japanese?
Yeah.
Yes.
The artist whose name escaped me during this interview is Masako Miki, a Berkeley-based artist who had an exhibition at the time at the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive.
You've seen it in person?
Not yet.
Yeah, so see, like that, I'm like, I really want to go see it in person. And like, I feel fairly confident that I'm going to have a different experience in person than I do on looking at the images online. But that said, I think that whether she's doing that on purpose or whether that's the museum, they're definitely like, you're seeing more and more shows like that where it's like, you can walk under this one and you can, so it's kind of interesting.
I think I got it from Vice magazine, where they said something about art and the selfie. So I guess the artwork isn't complete until it has been taken with a selfie.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's interesting.
I think the other phrase was the artwork has not been complete until it's been seen.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it kind of goes back to what you're saying about the importance of your work being seen, right?
Or my belief that any artwork should be
right, exactly. But then it's kind of like balancing that with the kind of some things being maybe like too easily Instagrammable, too easily digested. You know what I mean? So it's kind of an interesting like spectrum or balancing act between those, like wanting it to be seen, but then wanting still people to like engage with it beyond just, oh, I saw it on so-and-so's Instagram, or I'm just going to go and get a quick selfie and that's enough.
Yeah. And in terms of that spectrum, I'm wondering if like some artists like Murakami, his art is very commercial and very, selfie oriented.
Yeah.
But if you look at something like
but I love seeing it in person.
Exactly, it's so much fun. How can you not want to see it, right? But then there's other art where you just sort of gotta sit down there and look at it. You know what I mean? When you just see a couple of a big red dot and a big black dot, and you take a selfie next to it, it's kind of like, so what? You took a selfie next to a big red and black dot. At the end of the day, you got to sit and meditate on it. Right. If you really want to absorb it.
Yeah, totally.
If I'm going to do a portrait, there's been so many portraits. Why even do a portrait?
So it's a little bit nihilistic. It can be a little bit nihilistic for you.
I kind of believe, there's so many plain error drawings. There's already so many great portraits. But what am I going to add to the discourse of portraits? What can I add to increase the dialogue? That's where I get blocked, is the idea behind artwork. Because, again, I guess because maybe I'm a political artist, I'm sort of dogmatic in this. It's like, I think everything should have an idea, or everything should have a concept. Or Basquiat said, every line means something. Otherwise, you're just making decoration. You're just making ornament. You're just making commercial.
You're sort of adding images to like the huge imagery, inventory that we have, right? That's getting bigger and bigger by the day.
Exactly.
But then I like what you said too. I think the flip side of that is like, don't worry about it. Like you have faith in sort of your, like the long haul of being a creative person where if you do feel blocked or you can't, come up with a good enough reason to add to kind of the bucket of portraits or whatever your thing is, or like add an image of that leaf, that like you're gonna push through eventually. Like you're gonna have inspiration again, and you're gonna come up with a justification for that image or whatever. Like I like that piece of it too. That's kind of the flip side of, I think, the potential nihilism is just don't worry about it.
And the funny thing too is when I was in art school, and then when I was doing graphic design school, a lot of times in art, the instructor said, "Oh, well, that looks like graphic design. It doesn't look like art." And then when I was in graphic design, they said, "Oh, that looks like art. It doesn't look like graphic design." And I would tell them, you know what? It's all visual and it's all communication. It's kind of all the same at the end of the day. For me, art is sort of your intention. Yeah,
no, that's so funny. I got the same thing. And it took me a really long time to, like when people would be like, "Oh, this is very designy." Right, like, that was the thing. Or like, "Oh, your work is really design based." And at first I'd be like, "What do you mean?" Yeah, like I'm trying to make art here. And then I was like, wait a second. I have like this whole other like toolbox of skills that some people don't have, or like I can. And so then it's just about, again, going into the intentionality of it. I don't think I ever got the criticism that my design based work looked too much like art, but I definitely got the opposite. We talked a little bit before about how you made kind of a shift in your career so that your day job would be a bit more not only design based, but in a more creative field. So how, if at all, does the work you do for pay influence your creative practice and vice versa? In other words, how has your day job supported your creative practice, other than financially, if at all?
So that is a great question, and it has influenced me greatly because it's quilt making, and quilt making is primarily made by women. And quilt making as an art has always been sort of devalued as an art form. But where we work at, when we get a quilt or we get any kind of fabric art, we do call it, this piece of art. They put it rightly on a pedestal. And I say that in the context because a lot of older women artists are now getting their heyday. And in terms of, as I was talking about, in terms of where I work now, and we're seeing quilt making, is that people really understand the technical side of putting the quilt together. They understand the artistic sides of patterns, color combination, texture. That's the context that I want to be in.
So it sounds like there is kind of a bit of a kind of back and forth between like the conversations that you're having at work and even just the vocabulary. Then kind of maybe that's a bit more related to the work that you would do in your studio than if you were still in food service or something completely outside of the creative context.
And my artwork tends to be a handful of colors, but now I'm getting all this palette of colors to work with, and I'm sort of understanding how they work together in terms of and that's something outside of my experience, which is great because now I'm learning how other people work with color and patterns and shape. So yeah, I've sort of been waiting to see I got all this imagery in my head. How is it going to pop out? What's going to happen?
This brand new palette. So it's kind of percolating right now. Exactly. You'll see what it brews to keep the coffee metaphor going. Have you ever felt the need to really take a break from creative practice? And were there any benefits in doing so?
Not recently, because more recently I said I want to be an artist and I kind of feel like I'm making up for lost time.
Or not making up for lost time. It sounds like you're focused.
I'm mindful.
Mindful.
I'm mindful of my art practice. Either when I'm doing it or when I'm not doing it. Because yes, I have a lot of limited time to actually put my hand on a pen and on paper. And it's a little bit more easier to go out to an art gallery, take photos, and then repost it and share it and sort of have that dialogue. And that's sort of the middle ground for me. But I don't know, maybe that is substituting my art block. Maybe I shouldn't go to a gallery. Maybe I should just stay home and make art. If I could quit my day job and be an artist, yes, because I've done it before. So I'm not afraid of doing that. If someone wants to be an artist and they know they're going to be poor, or they know they're going to be marginalized, or they know they're not going to have health care, but if that's important to them, then I would say, yeah, they should do it because ideally you think things are going to work out at the end of the day.
More information about Gabriel can be found at artisanoffices.com. On the next episode of the podcast, I speak with Oakland-based artist M. Mine, Director of Faculty Affairs and Records at California College of the Arts. Artists and Offices is produced and edited by me, Rebecca Bird Grigsby. Intro music is provided by Mr. Neat Beats. Show notes and additional episodes can be found at artisanoffices.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the podcast on iTunes and leave the show a rating or review. This will help the podcast connect with even more artists and offices. Thank you so much for listening.
But why I don't have that incentive now? That is a good question.
Because you're busy.
Because I'm busy, I guess, yeah.
Yeah.